everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, Friday edition. Hope you're doing well. What is this, our fourth week, Kyle?
Week 4. Yep.
All right.
It's going by quick.
Yeah, I hope y'all are digging the twice weekly podcasts. We are. It's been pretty fun to just expand on what's happening in the psychedelic world, freeform, without a guest.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess before we dig in, some sponsor stuff. If you want to check us out and help us continue to produce this stuff, we have a account over at Patreon, patreon.com/psychedelics today. And you can support us with as little as $2 a month. Any bit helps. You get some gifts over there if you join us, exclusive access to things, early access to things. So check it out, see if it's for you. What else? Audible. So audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. An amazing service. I was just looking at my account yesterday and I have like an outrageous amount of Audible books.
How many hours have you clocked?
Like probably thousands at this point. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, some of the books are extraordinary. There's books on Terence McKenna, Tim Leary, psychedelic books generally, like Bill Richards' Sacred Something's up there. It's just so many great
knowledge.
Books. Yeah, Sacred Knowledge. Yeah. It's an amazing tool. You can get very educated with audiobooks on your commute, if you're walking, whatever. If you need a break from podcasts, again, audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. You get a month trial free and a free audiobook at no charge and no risk. You can cancel at any time, no cost. So check it out. No risk to you. Very worth it. One of my favorite things on my phone. It's probably the app I use the most next to Instagram, which I should probably get that straight and use Audible more. Cool. So yeah, if that Audible trial link is too long for you, go to psychedelicstoday.com/welcome. You got the link right in there. And I think that might be it for now for sponsor stuff. More classes on the horizon, so stay tuned. We've sold out our Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists, and really excited about that. We've also got merch. Like, I don't think we ever talk about merch. We've got like t-shirts and cups and all that kind of stuff. And I wear my, somehow I have a Vancouver Aquarium cup here instead of my Psychedelics Today cup, but I drink out of my Psychedelics Today cups almost every day and love it. So check that out, psychedelicstodayshop.com. You can get to it from all our sites. So check it out. Maybe there's something there you like and it helps us out a lot. So thank you all and be sure to tell a friend. Yeah. All right. So digging in, Kyle, you found this great article here, title. I saw this like first thing this morning on Lynn Marie's Instagram. Was a plant medicine podcast.
Plant medicine, yep.
Yeah. So title, psychedelic pharmaceutical company MindMed develops LSD neutralizer technology to shorten and stop LSD trips. Historically, thorazine benzodiazepines have been used for this kind of thing. 20, 30 minutes after you eat, 2-3 milligrams of Xanax, it seems to stop, even if it's a tremendously huge dose of LSD. And these guys have a new patent because they're stepping into this LSD space, and they want to make LSD less scary. So you have an off switch. I don't know. Any initial reactions to this article, Kyle?
Well, I guess we should maybe backtrack for those that don't know about MindMed.
Sure.
I don't know if we've chatted about them too much yet. And I know there have been a few articles that were released in the past few weeks, like highlighting what MindMed is doing. So they're a psychedelic pharmaceutical company, and they just teamed up with a university, I believe over in Switzerland, to really explore LSD. And I believe from that article, they're trying to get, IP patents on anything that they produce regarding LSD and the research that they're planning on doing. And, who else is backing? What was his name? Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank. Is that his name?
Right.
And they're also experimenting with a ibogaine derivative as well. And I think we might have actually touched on that.
Yeah, I try to talk about that drug a lot because I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, when I first started seeing some of these announcements, especially about like the IP stuff about LSD, it just kind of piqued my interest. That was about a few weeks ago, and maybe we'll put that link as well in the show notes. But as for this article, LSD Neutralizer, very interesting. I mean, I guess a question that pops into my mind is, what's the purpose of this and how will they be using it? Is it just for like an off switch in case of like therapy. Maybe things are going really sour or down and they need to stop it. But then I kind of come back to some of Groff's theories and like kind of what he says. If somebody comes into the emergency room having a really bad experience, I mean, first line of defense is to give them something like a benzo, right? To just stop it. But then what are you actually doing to that internal process, that psychic process that's unfolding, instead of actually just, creating that container for somebody to work through it? And granted, maybe there actually are situations where this could be really useful. And I'm reading here. This advancement paves the way for greater therapeutic applications of LSD and shorter acting psychedelic therapy treatments. And that's one of reason why people haven't really been, or researchers and clinicians haven't really been using LSD. Very long acting, right? Especially for like clinical use. So I don't know. This is interesting. What were some of your first thoughts that popped up when you saw this?
What is the drug? This article doesn't really talk about it. Is it just a, slightly different Xanax, like a benzodiazepine? They did file a patent, so you could look up the patent. I don't know why they don't link to the patent here on this article. So like that, is it like a really interesting novel drug, or is it just a benzo or like a Thorazine type thing? So I thought that was, a big question. And then like hearing you say that, it's like, then, if we need this for LSD, then why LSD? Like why not psilocybin? Or psilocin or whatever. There's plenty of shorter acting drugs in LSD. LSD is cheap, very democratic, but long lasting. And there's special kinds of therapy that can take this 14-hour window. If you're really patient, you can do really great psychotherapeutic work in this long LSD window. So yeah, it's just a matter of like, why are we doing this? Like there are useful scenarios like festivals.
Yeah.
Harm reduction at festivals. There's definitely, like, I think Zendo is optimal over like a pharma based in like intervention, like having a chill out place to just let your process ride out. Yeah. Amazing. Versus a pharma interaction. And that stuff did come up for me too. The Groff stuff that you mentioned, like, is their process going to get stuck and are they going to get worse as a result of stopping? I think that's a valid question that we need to look at. That said, in a clinical setting, if someone's like spinning way out of control and gets physically dangerous to themselves or others, it needs to be restrained. Like restraining somebody is no good in a psychedelic session. That's horrible and traumatic, to be avoided. So, perhaps a pharmacological intervention is helpful to have on hand.
Totally.
How often are people in a psychedelic session going to have that happen? I think it's pretty rare. But a war vet comes up, they got blown up and been in multiple hand-to-hand combat scenarios and a lot of firefights. Like stuff could get wild for them.
Right.
Yeah. So like note that this article we're looking at is on a prnewswire.com website. So it's not a real article. It's a PR piece. And it seems to suggest that, hey, we haven't had any drugs to shorten or end an LSD trip before, which is not true whatsoever. And they don't really even hint at that, I don't think, based on my skimming. So like, are they just trying to patent a prior use that has been used in hospitals since the 50s? Perhaps.
Well, I mean, even like you saying like worst case scenario, that's what I was thinking. Like somebody gets completely out of control, becomes a little bit violent, and boom, at least you have some sort of off switch for safety reasons. And it makes me wonder, you said, oh, like, don't we have medications like this? And I think about like the benzos and stuff like that, or maybe some of those like classical type of like antipsychotics, quote unquote, they used to be called like chemical restraints, right?
Yeah.
To really knock somebody out. And so I wonder, like, will that still have that type of mechanism where you actually sedate somebody and it knocks them out? Or is it kind of like just shortens the trip and it doesn't completely...
Like Narcan for psychedelics.
Yeah, like it just stops. Yeah, like I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what the mechanism is there. Yeah, and right here it says, MindMed believes this technology, when further developed, may one day be marketed as an added feature to shorten a therapy session or to stop a session if a patient is not comfortable. So yeah, really interesting.
I can see some timing, like some issues with that, in that, okay, like you want to be able to drive home. Here's this thing. You can drive home in 1 hour now. And you just had this extreme LSD experience. So like, is it just to fit it into a comfortable pattern? And again, the question's why. Like,
Right.
like if we could do better therapy with more time, is there some sort of imperative, ethical or otherwise, to do that?
Mhm.
You know, things to consider.
Right. Yeah. And like, how will that be marketed? It's like, hey, come in for LSD therapy, and then we're going to control your trip by giving you this medication that stops it and not really riding it out fully. And what is that? Is that to just create better business models where it's more like efficient? Or, you know, then are you really honoring that full experience versus wanting to just like go in, titrate and be like, okay, we're going to cut this off? Because, I mean, I don't know. Like sometimes those come downs are really interesting. People develop a lot of great insights during those times. And I think
I like coming off of LSD. It's super fun. Like, largely not horrible.
Yeah.
Your mind's kind of still on.
Very plastic-like, and you're just making lots of different connections, and yeah, things start to fall into place. Then it's like, you know, shaking the snow globe up, and then it's like, things start to settle, and you go, oh, okay, yeah, I get that now.
So, yeah, like, I'm okay with new drugs. I'm always okay with new drugs coming on. I'm a proponent for having like another couple hundred Sasha Shulgins doing that project, funding them heavily, and having gazillions of new drugs. And that's one thing. And then another thing is just patenting. I did a quick search trying to find what this drug was in the patent. I couldn't find it in 2 seconds, but more soon. Like maybe we find out what that is and we talk about it more next Friday. So, yes, there's benefits to having these drugs in the pharmacopoeia, but we've already had, thorazine and benzodiazepines to help out. So like what is new here? Is it just PR? So that's one question.
Yeah.
And, I hope MindMed is successful. I do hope that they are able to bring these drugs through FDA trials. But Mike Margulies and Rick Doblin found this mention in a Forbes.com article that MindMed was talked about in. Title of the article, "This New York City pharma startup wants to turn LSD into an FDA-approved medicine for anxiety disorder." Kyle, you got to meet is he the CEO, JR?
Founder, CEO?
He's up there. He's the person that was
co-founder
interviewed.
and co-CEO.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he is the one that's kind of mainly talking to the journalist for this article. And this quote was a little disturbing. Psychedelics are not new. They're very old. And in American culture, we've had, decades of a culture building around these substances. And it's something that I think should be respected. So a quote in this article that was pretty alarming. "This isn't the 1960s all over again. I want nothing to do with those kinds of folks who want to decriminalize psychedelics." He says, "You don't have to be a revolutionary to bring these drugs to market. You just need to show up to work every day, do the rigorous science, take a pragmatic approach, and we'll get there." So, he's not wrong in that second step of things. This isn't hard. You just got to do the paperwork and work. The funding is the hard part, and that's really not that hard anymore. The hard part is honoring the history and being respectful to all of us who are here doing work every day and not necessarily trying to patent something and own it forever and, all this junk, which is important in a pharma company, but not necessarily important to those of us in the culture who have, I'm told that they're trying to patent LSD, which is a little weird because LSD has been around for such a long time and there's so many other known uses, AKA, I think in the legal language, prior art around these things, where I don't know how well that would hold up in court, if both sides had similar money to spend on a court case, right? Like if they came after us, we would fold. But if pharma company went up to pharma company or MAPS went after MindMed, like that's a different angle. Like that's, probably, something different. They've got great lawyers over there already. So, something to consider. Are these big companies, I think the question this raises is, are these big companies coming into the space allies or not?
Well, that's the question, I think. Yeah.
It's to be determined. Like, I think they are part of the ecosystem for better or worse, right? Like, we've got wasps and ticks. They do play, I hate to make that analogy about these companies, but we have things that are perceived as not nice, though perhaps playing ecologically necessary functions. And I don't know, how do we become in greater harmony with them so it's not just like we're throwing rotten tomatoes at each other for the next bunch of years, you know?
Right.
In saying that he wants nothing to do with decriminalization people, JR has essentially come out and said, I am not an ally, like just pretty much said that. And that's something that we really should watch. Like Peter Thiel, possibly not an ally with Compass Pathways. And I don't know. Like I appreciate the people he has on his team, like Bill Richards. And there's a number of others that are great over at Compass. But, you know, is this like what is really happening and what are we doing? What is the best scenario? These are all things that we need to carefully consider. And is one company owning psilocybin for the best? You know, probably not. But in the other question, there is a really interesting Twitter thread. Mike Margolyes, you can look him up. Mike Margolyes, Margolies on Twitter, had with JR. And I think Paul Austin even got in the mix here. And it's like, Mike asks, are medical use cases the only use case you support for psychedelic use? And it seemed to say, yes, that is true. Whereas there's, you know, huge swaths of culture that would disagree, like religious use cases. Like, okay, should the peyote church be illegal? NAC be illegal? You know, according to his statements, he doesn't care. He's only interested in talking about medical use cases there.
Right.
So, you know, should Grateful Dead people and Fish fans all go to jail? Like, so as the CEO of a pharma company, you have really an interesting tightrope to walk. I don't know. Anything you want to open up on there?
Oh man. Yeah. It's, you know, as I think as we touched on in the past, like this is complex to be able to see kind of both sides of the coin, and thinking about like making this more public, accessible, this treatment, bringing it to like larger populations. And, you know, to be able to do that, we need people with money to come into the space and be able to fund this research. But, you know, on the one side, it's like medicalization is just one part of it, I think. And, you know, I think that's what even Paul Austin said here in Mike's thread. You know, medicalization will probably win in the short term, but decriminalization in the long run. And, you know, I think we have to kind of come back to honoring these different contexts and like the historical use of these substances, and to just really appreciate how people approach this. And I don't know, yeah, just from that comments, like I don't want to have anything to do with the people that want to decriminalize it. You know, I think, okay, maybe this person isn't an ally, and what's his history behind this? Is he just seeing this as an opportunity to grab the next best, most exciting novel thing and to make a bunch of money off of it and want to have patents on everything that they produce and that they research? It says, you know, as part of an agreement, I'm reading this from a Yahoo News, MindMed will gain the exclusive rights to data, compounds, and patents associated with the research on LSD and other psychoactive substances, helping to accelerate a phase 2 clinical trial of high-dose LSD treatments. And, you know, I get it.
Which is against that open science statement that they did not sign.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if they would. Well, they obviously won't sign it, right? And I guess, you know, coming from that pharmaceutical company framework, I could get why you want to own patents on that to get a return on your investment. But again, it comes back to like, well, what's the intention here? And are we really trying to push psychedelics onto everybody and saying these tools and these medicines are great for everybody, and we need to make this into a super accessible medicine where everybody has to do this, right? And I don't know. It's really complex territory. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just wonder what the intention is behind a company like this of wanting to like money. Yeah, exactly.
If Kevin O'Leary's involved, it's money. You know, it's kind of mission, but it's mainly money.
Yeah.
And they're very dedicated to making this an accessible medicine and treatment in a medical setting. I'm sure it's going to be expensive, but what isn't in the medical world? You know, $500 for an IV bag that's 50 cents. It's like, come on. So, yeah. And JR, is that what he goes by?
Yep.
He's got a really interesting background in his Twitter profile. You look at that, it shows that he is a graduate or alumni of Y Combinator, which is one of the most successful incubator groups ever. A lot of Google alumni and PayPal mafia type people there. PayPal mafia is a fun name they call themselves. They're just PayPal alumni. And yeah, so they are very sharp business people. And I think he did some time with Uber. You said bringing Uber to Asia, maybe?
That's what somebody just told me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, don't take our word for that. It's just what we've heard. So an amazing business background, really impressive business background, but is that compatible with how a lot of us want this thing to play out?
Mm-hmm.
And do we even have a say? I don't know. Like, in a sense, like, businesses are allowed to do what businesses do.
Right.
We can complain. Does it really help? I don't know.
Right.
Like, a lot of people have been yelling at Nestle, one of the most evil corporations in the world, for decades, and they continue to be one of the most profitable corporations ever.
Mm-hmm.
Dominating water, which is terrifying in and of itself. Yeah.
So and I guess it kind of just comes back to the framework that we operate in, right? It's like, here are a bunch of traditions and people and contexts, that people have just been engaging in forever, in a sense, and then just somebody comes on the scene and goes, oh, well, here is an opportunity to either take advantage of all this and to exploit it and to make a bunch of money with it. And it's like, everybody's been throwing their own little party and everybody's been kind of cooperating and really enjoying it. And then you just get this new person on the scene that throws this big party, like, well, I'm taking it over now, and kind of dismissing everything that might have come before, or kind of just even showing some respect to that. And just speaking to some speculation here, I don't know JR really, and I don't know his intentions, but I don't know, whenever I just think of big business and money and how this is all wrapped up with, well, and two, just coming back to the psychedelic experience, like, what is this thing? Can we actually really control it the way we want to control it? And when I see like pharma companies and stuff like this, like, want to get super involved in this, I just go, do we actually know what we're dealing with here at times, right? Like, psychedelics are extremely weird substances, and the experiences that come from it are just, they're all over the board. And like, to me, that's always made me respect them in a way where I go, these feel sacred at times. And I really want to approach this stuff with respect and caution, and almost kind of like this sacredness to it, and being like, like, these are very, very profound experiences. And how do we approach the profound, right? It's like exploiting God in a sense all over again, or something like that, exploiting spirituality when, from the medicinal side, it's awesome, right? We want to be able to give treatment to folks that are really suffering. But yeah, I don't know. I always come back to kind of like the sacredness of psychedelics too. And do we want to just capitalize on it and exploit it all over again? So it's a tricky balance, walking that tightrope, as Eric Davis would say.
Yeah. It's religion. It's a lot of things to a lot of people. It's like constantly changing, depending on who you're talking to, and you're having the same conversation with person A and person B, and they just end very differently. You're like, you had all sorts of different preconceptions than I did, and how do we even deal with that? So yeah, huge, Kyle. So things that we need to consider carefully. We're not saying we have answers. We're saying we have questions, and we have a lot left to sort out as a culture around these things. Like, we say decriminalization is the long-term goal. Like, I disagree. I think legalization is the long-term goal for me. I think lab-verified products in legal labs, not underground labs, is where we should be with this stuff. I hate to say we need some sort of license to use it legally, but perhaps that's the move, at least provisionally. Portugal's doing great with decrim, but they could be doing better. So, it just allows for a lot more social containers when things are illegal, a lot more safety when things are legal. Totally. The primary source of drug harm is prohibition. And we just have to really keep that in mind. Like, imagine if ayahuasca was 100% legal. Imagine how much safer it would be. Yeah. That's the only thing we really need to look at. And I get in a lot of arguments and I get a lot of shit on the internet for this, but I'm holding the line on that. Like, for me, perfect is legalization, not decriminalization. A lot of people say the government will ruin it. I don't agree with that.
Right.
Government's ruined plenty, but the government is vast, and it's not one thing all the time.
Well, and I wonder too, what would legalization look like not in a capitalistic market where you're able to take compounds and create them into novel offerings, kind of like when you see with the cannabis movement, right? And I wonder, maybe that's part of the critique with a lot of folks that just want them decriminalized. They want them kind of just like normalized, not out in the open market where you can create all these novel little like packages for mushrooms or this or that. And I see maybe some folks within the decriminalization movement want to kind of keep it in that sacred circle, right? Like these are sacred compounds. Why do we need to bring them to market like that? On the flip side, I mean, having lab tested, verified stuff and knowing that you're not buying bunk stuff or, say mushrooms that are moldy that could cause other complications, that would be really great, to be able to have access to stuff like that. But what does that look like? And I think everything that's like going on right now, culturally and economically, what is the future going to look like? Like, could legalization actually look like something different in the future where it's not just about commodity, I guess everything's always going to be commodified in some sense, but I don't know. I wonder.
And, how do we even want to deal with commodities, right? Like, how do we even relate to a commodity in a sensible way and commodification? So like, here's one of these articles you put up, Scientists Turn Yeast into Psychedelic Psilocybin Factories. Previously it was bacteria. So with CRISPR and other GE technologies, we're able to really make some interesting stuff happen. So what happens when anybody can have a 5-gallon bucket in their basement or closet producing XYZ drug for next to nothing? Mitch Gomez mentioned this might happen with cocaine in the nearest future. It could happen with any drug if we have the genetic skill to do this, which, it'll happen at places like MIT first, and then it'll kind of drip out everywhere else. Like once the technology becomes a little more democratic, which is what happens with technology. So then what is commodification at that point? Like,
right,
it's nearly free.
Right.
Like
I was even going to say, I remember like a few years ago when 3D printing started coming out, I remember seeing articles about 3D printing drugs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you had access to, I don't know how that technology works, like puts together chemical like equations and just prints something out and mixes a bunch of chemicals together and it's able to I don't know. That's just really mind-boggling. But yeah, what if you had the technology to be able to do something like that? That really democratizes it, right?
Right. And then like, what is commodification? To me, a commodity is a bulk price product. Like think oil or wheat or something. Like generally speaking, you're not paying like Farmer Andy down the street for a couple bushels of wheat. You're buying it because it went through a whole process, like a commodity trading method and et cetera. So I guess like, yes, it's a really special thing to have ayahuasca in a sacred ceremony, in a sacred container. And then once everything starts becoming like wildly cheap, that's perhaps when things become commodities. And like, what does that mean? Is it cheapening the sacred? Is it profaning the sacred, which a lot of people don't like it when their sacred thing becomes profane? Like I'll say a lot of things about certain churches and it doesn't go well, and so it's something to consider. Like what happens when your 5-MeO DMT session is only $5? Like, is your shaman really good enough? Is your facilitator really good enough? Like, perhaps not. I don't know. Like, this is why a lot of people choose not to play in commodified markets. So for instance, differentiating your offering with extra value, like I am such a good therapist that your session is going to be 10x better than company X. They'll have longer lasting effects. You'll feel better sooner, et cetera. You'll be less freaked out in session. Like, I don't know. Like, this is where my mind goes around a lot of this stuff.
It's tricky. Yeah. And as you're saying this, like, I'm just thinking about like how much, like, I guess spiritual belief can sometimes be wrapped up within like wanting to keep psychedelics sacred. Are they sacred for most people? I don't know. Sometimes they feel sacred.
I would say no.
Yeah,
to most people.
But for most people, maybe it's not, right? Maybe they just like have an experience. They go, wow, it was really cool, right? And maybe it doesn't have a lot of spiritual or religious connotation, and they're fine with a market that's more commodified because they have better access to it, right? But for the folks that may have had a really profound experience and they want to keep that somewhat to themselves or keep that sacredness alive without it being out everywhere, maybe that's part of the conversation that people are having about the decrim movement and why they don't want to see it just exploited. I don't know, though.
Let's look back a few hundred years when most of Europe only had access to Bibles in Latin, and most believers in Christianity never had access to even touch a Bible, right? It was only the priests. The priests could speak Latin, so they could read the Bible. And how not democratic is that? And is that similar to like the person who only wants to them and their friends and whoever else is in the know to be able to buy, heady farm to table, MDMA, LSD, ayahuasca, whatever, versus like, how do we make this work democratically? And that's a really tricky question. I don't know the answer. I think there needs to be a lot more professionals in the space. And hopefully we and other groups are kind of doing that.
Right.
But it's hard math. Yeah. Like you keep saying, we keep saying, this is not easy to decrypt. Yeah. And that's kind of why we are here. Like an easy answer is just that. It's an easy answer. It's probably cheap, probably not right.
Yeah. And I mean, you just talking about like religion in that sense just reminds me about like rites of passages, right? And thinking about, say, the Eleusinian mysteries, right? I mean, people punishable by death by Athens to speak of your experience, right? And so it was kept secret for over 2,000 years, which in a sense is really interesting that, like, what is it like to keep something so sacred to yourself because that was your experience, right? And just thinking about, like, I think it's cool to develop our own rights. I mean, we have no rites of passage, right? And so, in a sense, if it was more democratized, we're all kind of creating our own rites of passages with these substances and saying, this is the way I do it, this is the way I do it. But you just saying, like, the pastor maybe being the gatekeeper, right? And I think about a metaphor that I use for, say, rites of passages or spirituality is like sometimes more in those religious frameworks where you have somebody mediating, say there's a forest, right? And maybe you live out in the plains and you go, I've seen what's in the forest and you're not allowed in there. So I'll tell you what I saw, and everybody has to stay out because there's a big scary thing in there. And if you go in there, you're going to die. And how do I know? Well, I saw it and I got away from it. And so now I'm preaching to you that that's in there. And then you can create a whole narrative around that. And everybody becomes scared of whatever's in there, right? Versus, say, if there was an interesting rite of passageway saying, hey, there's a big scary monster in there, but you have to engage in that. And we're going to give you the tools to prepare to go in there. And you have to figure that out, right, for yourself. So, it's really taking that moderator, mediator away and saying, hey, here's the experience to go into. Go in and figure it out yourself, right? Because I think as human beings, we all have the right to explore that. And I mean, that's a metaphor for whatever that is, spirituality, your mind, your relationship with God. And so it's not being mediated by somebody else, somebody telling you what your relationship should be, but actually giving you the tools and the techniques to go in there and say, I need to figure this out myself. Because we all have the capacity to do that. And I think we should all have the right to do that. But again, it comes down to control. If you're the one that saw this big scary thing in the woods and you're able to control everybody to say, hey, don't go in there. I've seen this. And you guys all have to stay out here and listen to me.
Right. Yeah. How do we know what is true? How do we know what's helpful for us? It's a lot of big questions here. Like, is locking up drug offenders helpful? Not really. No. Like, it doesn't appear to be helpful at all. So, yeah, what do we really do? And I think what we really do is keep exploring these topics.
Yeah.
Let's not have a quick, easy answer. Just because Marx said something doesn't make it true. It makes it accurate in his worldview and in his whatever consistent system. It's just not necessarily universalizable. And that's a big deal. So, yeah.
And I wonder, like, too, if, like, these substances really came to market and were accessible to everybody. I mean, you kind of get more into like that new age, quote unquote, type of talking of like maybe elevating to the 5D. I mean, what would happen if people started to have these experiences? And that's really interesting. Where would humanity go if we were able to each have that right to go into this space, having it more accessible? And maybe that's scary for a lot of people because of the control thing. It's like, hey, I kind of like the way things are. We don't want to disrupt that. Or maybe I like to know more than you, so we'll keep you on the outside and I can tell you how to have this experience, versus like allowing everybody to have an experience and trying to come together to figure it out. And I think that's actually really scary, being like, what happens when all these people might have access and might be able to experience this? But again, I don't know. It sounds like from traditional cultures, many small tribes probably all had some sort of experience together, right? Or, a place like Greece. Well, I guess you had to be an initiate. Not everybody was an initiate of the Eleusinian mysteries, but I don't know, maybe new cosmologies get birthed out of having it more democratized. I don't know.
It's a great point. Hopefully. So let's jump back to the psilocybin thing. Looks like some chemists at the University of Miami are working on this. It's like this E. coli method. Says currently it's not more cost effective than current synthesis techniques as it requires expensive precursor chemicals. But, perhaps that's something that'll get sorted out in time. I'm kind of hopeful that they can produce like kilograms and kilograms of this stuff over time using these methods. Perhaps it might require special precursors, but I think that's just an engineering problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people might get a little uncomfortable that we're manipulating DNA on things, but I don't know.
That's what they're doing. They're saying they're taking the DNA from the mushroom that encodes its ability to make this product and putting it in E. coli. It's the similar way you make beer through a fermentation process. We are effectively taking the technology that allows for scale and speed of production and applying it to psilocybin, producing E. coli. Interesting.
Yeah. So they're hoping that by being able to produce a ton of this stuff using this method, that more research will be easier to do because hopefully the cost on pharma grade or research grade psilocybin will come down a lot.
Right. And so I guess as I was reading that, they were referring to the E. coli method, but this new study describes a method of producing it on commonly known baker's yeast. So that's really interesting. And I don't know, when I think of E. coli, would we want to be producing things on E. coli or baker's yeast? Baker's yeast seems a little bit safer, but I don't know.
Right. Well, in a lab, like this E. coli thing is really common. Like researchers have been totally manipulating E. coli for at least 15 years in a similar way. Gene editing tech has become a lot cheaper. So I think, it's just moving. It's the way research is being done now. It's well funded. It's easy to kind of say like, hey, look at this really interesting thing that was not that expensive to do. So it's curious, but we'll see where we go from there. I was hearkening back to this idea of green chemistry, like of how like plants are phenomenal chemists, producing really interesting chemicals at naturally occurring temperatures. Like you don't have to go up to 1,000 degrees to make something happen, or, close to negative 500. Like you don't need to do that kind of stuff as a plant to make really amazing chemicals. So like how can chemistry become more green? And it would be by mimicking plant behaviors, plant chemistry. Like how is the plant able to do this? And then how could we do it similarly to that at a lower cost / environmental toll? It's a really really interesting thing. And it looks like it's happening, even in Miami. Like Miami, people don't think of as a psychedelic hub, but there's some interesting stuff happening there.
Right.
Yeah. So like I think there was even some 18MC researchers there. I think one professor somewhere in Florida, I think it was Miami, got in trouble for having an iboga plant in his office.
Yep.
So like there's stuff happening everywhere, I guess is the point. It's not just Maryland and NYU, right? Or
Imperial.
NYC.
Yeah, there's
there's a lot.
Alabama,
Yeah, it's amazing. It's totally amazing. Like Dr. Hendricks did amazing work on that cocaine psilocybin study. Yeah. So anything else on this yeast article?
This is interesting. They say, although this new study presents promising proof of concept. They say more metabolic engineering is necessary to make the process more efficient. Quote, we find in the study is that we get a lot of this non-phosphorylated compound psilocin, essentially losing half of our product because the phosphate group falls off. Dealing with a high amount of psilocin is something that absolutely needs to be solved before realistically moving to a production process. That's interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. So totally worth knowing. Like, I think that's a really valuable point to like keep in mind. Like perhaps there just needs to be a lot more perfection in the process and experimentation. And then perhaps we have totally democratic, like it's easy enough to grow mushrooms, but a more democratic way of, making these compounds more available. I've still not had pure psilocybin. I'd like to eventually, but I'm not necessarily in a hurry. But, someday. This gives me hope. Yeah, cool. So let's move on to this article on The Nation. Can psychedelics treat climate grief? We're in a really weird period of time with this COVID thing and, the world being a little crazy right now, which was it really normal before?
Right.
So the subtitle here, author Michael Pollan talks about whether drugs that comfort the terminally ill can also help people mourning the climate future. So I remember not that long ago, the feds made it somewhat difficult, if not illegal, for federal employees to put out data at 2040 and beyond. So, 20 years out is when a lot of the projections kind of stop. And what a lot of people are saying is that 20 years out is when the worst of it's really going to pick up and it's going to be a really nasty future. So, displaced people, countries going totally underwater and disappearing, like Miami being underwater, Boston, lots of New York, a lot of population centers are on the coast. And what happens when everybody's displaced and traumatized? And, I think there's a lot more room for psychedelic therapy and religious use cases of psychedelics at that point.
Yep.
Yeah. Anything come up for you on this one?
Well, I stumbled across this and I just thought it was good to touch on, considering that we are recording this on Earth Day.
Yeah.
So happy Earth Day, everybody.
Happy Earth Day.
Well, I guess it will be past Earth Day when this is published, but yeah.
Every day's Earth Day.
Yeah. But yeah, just coming across this article and just thought it would be good to touch on being Earth Day. But yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting thing about climate grief. And I know I've seen a lot of articles even pop up in the mental health space of people kind of coming into therapy sessions and counseling sessions with grief for what's happening to the earth and just the way like either ecosystems are destroying and animals going extinct or animals like dying, like what happened in Australia during those fires, and we are nature, right? And what's happening to nature is also a reflection of what's kind of going on inside of us. So I think it's a real thing that to be able to grieve for the loss of habitat and animals and everything, it's very valid. And how could we maybe, grieve and deal with these things? And we know that from some of the research at Imperial, and, if you go back and listen to the episode that we did with Dr. Sam Gandy, we talk about the research and psilocybin increasing nature connectedness. So, I think this is going to have huge implications moving forward if things keep going the way that they're going, right? I mean, even just thinking about this virus right now, right? I mean, this is an issue of the earth, right? Probably an issue of climate change as well as, also there's I think I mentioned this, an interview just talking about like, this could be our future as ecosystems start to get destroyed. Animals come into different ecosystems, different viruses start to morph and mutate. This could continue to be, an issue that keeps coming up. Permafrost melting in Siberia and those virus and bacteria, could they be active and find their ways into humans? Who knows? But could be a real thing that we might be facing. And so how do we even just deal with some of the grief that's coming up, dealing with some of the questions that might be coming up, the uncertainty? And psychedelics might help you really examine that. And maybe they also help us to examine our place in nature, right? How do we interact with the ecosystem? How do we interact with our local landscapes? And is the way that we are going the way that we should be going or want to be going? Can we make a change? I've definitely had my experiences in holotropic states where I go, there might be another way. Right. And so I think being able to have those experiences to reflect on our place in nature can be really important. And just kind of comes back to that philosophical existential thing. Like, what are we doing here? Right. And to be able to examine that and maybe feel okay with different ways of being. So
we were at that conference in Claremont, California with John Cobb, the Gibsons, and many others. And the question posed was, can extraordinary experiences help save us from planetary ecological collapse? And that line, I think this research was done before, but the line about the imperial researchers saying we are able to, make people more sympathetic and feel more connected to ecological systems, the earth in general, and, caring for it. And what is that? Like, we did a whole 3 days on this topic with a number of philosophers, eco-psychologists, theologians, etc. And it was a very interesting time.
Yeah.
I felt like at times we got a little off track, but that's what happens when you get a bunch of people together. But yeah, in general, I think yes, the answer is yes. We have data to show it. And, we don't need everybody on earth to do perfect, no waste life cycles, lifestyles. We just need a lot of people to try.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and a lot of organizations to try. We need regulation in place. We need a lot. So this is like all hands on deck. And to feel that and to feel comfortable with it, like we have to get beyond grief a little bit. Like we have to feel the grief, but we have to be able to act.
Yeah, totally.
Otherwise, what are we left with? And I'm thinking back to John Cobb, like, what is the value of a tree? Is it exclusively dollars? Or is there more? Does the tree have value in itself? Does the forest have value in itself? These are things that, I think, yes, it has more value than just dollars. I think we chatted about this last week too, maybe, but like I've got huge swaths of forests that are now gone. Now you've got suburbs everywhere that I was very connected to, very formative in my life. And it was actually really heartbreaking for a while. And I just remembered something else you said, like people in therapy and these psychology things are talking a lot more about ecological grief. And this was the reason I was going, the ostensible reason I was going to therapy a while back was like, okay, this just looks like everything that I love is going away. So like, what the fuck? What are we doing? And how do I relate to this now? Like I wasn't necessarily suicidal or anything, but I was definitely very upset about it. And I'm like, what is the point? What do I do now? Do I just pick up heroin and TV? Like, I don't know. Like bide my time and take it slow. I don't know. So like, I eventually kind of just came to terms with you have to be a little brave, just face this stuff head on. And hopefully done well, psychedelics can help you find that courage, or breathwork can help you find that courage. And, that's kind of where I was at. It was a lot of just residual breathwork stuff that helped me through it and helped me develop through it. And like it might get really fucked up, but we've got to face it. We've got nephews, sons and daughters and nieces, and if not for your family, for everybody. Like I kind of come some weird kind of cliche quote about family. Like some celibate monk said something along the lines of, "Lord, you've blessed me with such a large family. Thank you very much." It's like the whole world being your family. I always kind of harken back to that. It's like really helpful for me to go, okay, like we're in this together. How do we survive? And how do we prioritize too? Like it can get really tricky. Like, do we want to attack big pharma? Do we want to attack the feds? Or do we want to really work to build something? Like where should our attention go? Should it be to attacking or building? Tearing down? Like, it's a lot easier to blow up a bridge than it is to build one. I had a pro snowboarder tell me that once.
A couple sticks of dynamite and explosives, press a button, boom.
It's funny how these pro snowboarders can be like philosophers for the youth. Turday Hackinson, one of the top all-time snowboarders, turned me on to Bucky Fuller when I was still probably in high school. It's something, the line he used at the beginning of his video is, "Spaceship Earth does not come with an operator's manual." So we have to make one up for ourselves. And is the operation manual, let's drive this shit into the ground and party super hard? Or is it like, hey, let's maybe reframe partying and growth and business so that we can keep living? So like there's less suffering now and later, and there's a positive mission we can keep moving on. Yeah. There's a lot here, and there's a lot to dig through. And how do we prioritize this shit? It's really uncomfortable to think about. Like, do we feed the homeless or fight climate change? Are they different? I don't know. And like a point someone made to me a long time ago is like, to keep somebody alive in an ICU in America is very resource intensive. And how many lives could we have saved in Africa with those dollars or just physical resources? Like, it's a really uncomfortable truth. But it's, psychedelics lead us towards uncomfortable truths quite often. Yeah. What do we do with them? I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, these are the questions, right? These are the questions to explore, I feel like. I mean, I think about this stuff every day, I guess, to some extent, and just reflecting on some of my experiences and what have they taught me. And, just even coming back to that concept of, we need to move past the grief. I mean, you make a really good point about that. And I even kind of bring that up when I talk about psychedelic integration and just getting caught up in these process loops. Like, oh, I need to keep chewing through this. I need to keep like grieving this. I need to keep healing this, instead of like, maybe, yes, that's valid. But I mean, for me, I could sit there and process this stuff all day and be so analytical about every little thing. And then I'm always thinking like, well, am I taking action on this stuff? And am I like making a difference? And no, I notice I'm just like kind of caught up in this grief cycle or this process cycle. And how do we move past that to actually make some change, and to move forward? And, I think that's the trick sometimes. And, being in the mental health world, this might come off, I think, always trying to focus on the trauma and this and that. And really, I always come back to like, what is healing, right? Is healing constantly going back in there and trying to like reopen these wounds and to constantly grieve and constantly process this stuff? Or can we move past that a little bit and learn when to put it aside, or, not completely bury it? Like, sure, if you want to go back there again at some point, but like, when does it stop being useful to keep going into those spaces? And I think you can even think about that when thinking about taking psychedelics. Do you just keep going in, dealing with the same stuff and actually not making any real changes or progress in your life? I mean, it's funny, if you journal, you should definitely go back and read your journals from like 5, 10, 15 years. And, I've definitely gone back and looked at stuff and go, wow, I was saying some of the same stuff 10 years ago, and it's interesting to really pay attention to how you process stuff and where you get caught up on, and how can you maybe move forward. And but yeah, again, not saying that's not valid. We all need to create that time. I think sometimes we don't do enough grieving, and sometimes we are kind of just stuck in this trauma loop, and we're not even conscious of what's going on. And, from my perspective, I feel like that's even what got us here, is that we're not creating enough space for some of that to be able to take like real action, because we're just caught up in a cycle where we're not even aware. But, then on the flip side, if you are doing a lot of healing work and you are going in, like, when is it to say, okay, maybe now's a good time to hit the pause button on this and actually make some changes or do some action in the world. And coming back to priorities too, right? Yeah, it's tough. Like, where do I put my priorities? Do I put my priorities on, my career, or do I put my priorities on creating some sort of homestead? Like, I don't know, thinking about like, and again, comes back to cosmology in a sense. Like, what are we doing here? What is your purpose here? Are we stewards of the earth? Do we want to continue to engage in consumerism and just like work sometimes pointless jobs that don't feed us? Or are we here to really steward this spaceship earth, right? And make sure we don't crash and burn it to the ground? And what type of lifestyle things do we need to maybe get rid of that are really uncomfortable? But again, what do you believe in? Why do you think you're here? Right? And these are really tough questions to answer.
But worth struggling with. And
yeah,
Yeah, I really just want to point out an important thing you said. Like, when should we kind of like hit pause on therapy and do something? Like, that's definitely a really valid point. Like, when do we get constructive as opposed to repeating the same shit, the Freudian psychiatrist or whatever, psychoanalyst for, 10 years going over the same shit. Like, did you really make progress? Like, maybe. Like, did you really make progress with all that ayahuasca? Maybe. But what are you going to do with it? Like Tom Roberts, the writer, had this line, like, if so, so what? Like, it's great that you talked to God 20 times, but so what?
Yeah.
What did you do with it? Did you help yourself? Did you help your family, others? Like, did you do something really, novel with art or music or business or something? A lot of possibilities.
Yeah. And it's just something I notice in myself. Like, I definitely get caught up in processes at times. I like to be analytical. I like to think about things. And then sometimes I'm like, shit, I got to hit the pause button on this because I'm getting nowhere, right? Like, I'm just like ruminating about nonsense, and that's not healthy all the time, right?
So let's jump over to this DC article. Headline on Forbes: DC would vote to decriminalize psychedelics. Poll shows. Writer Tom Angel has been writing on this stuff for a while. Writes at Marijuana Moment. He wrote this article, and yeah, it's looking like if the vote was right now and it went forward, like, they would pass this in DC, decriminalize all psychedelics, psychedelic plants and fungi. So like similar to the Santa Cruz, Oakland thing. And it's pretty interesting to think that DC, the belly of the beast, would pass this. It's pretty fascinating, really. It's an interesting situation because it's not a state. It has like really weird voting rules. And the fact that this region, DC, would do that is fascinating. I don't know. Anything come up for you on that? Like, it looks like it's not going to happen now because, COVID has really gotten in the way of the politics. But yeah, I don't know. Anything come up for you on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I was just, it's been interesting keeping track of this because there was a lot of speculation that this was totally going to flop. So it was interesting to see this posted. When was this? Yesterday. They would try to continue with it. But let's see. What do they say? They said when the actual ballot text at the start of the survey, bare majority, 51%, said they were in favor compared to 27% opposition. Support rose to 60% after voters were given information about the measure's provisions. So that's interesting to see, that 9% increase. And that seems pretty good for, for support, right? I think that sometimes shows how rapid things are changing. They said, despite the current public health crisis, DC voters have made it clear that they're ready to change how DC approaches entheogens. The poll also found that 10% of voters say they have personally used psilocybin or magic mushrooms, and 23% say that they knew somebody close to them that has used. So yeah, really interesting.
Right. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and it could really help set the stage for a lot more places. California, people just like kind of roll their eyes when we talk about California often in the rest of the country. It's like, great, I love California, but it's like, that's different than the rest of the world. But DC is very much it's not paradise. It's rough. It's got a lot of really poor people. It's got, police brutality up the wazoo. So like, it's real America. It's definitely a place that people watch too. So, like Nashville, Tallahassee, Memphis, all these places are going like, okay, this happened in DC. I can relate to this now. So then maybe we do the same thing and put less people in jail for psychedelic drugs.
Yeah, it'd be awesome if they were able to get enough support and pass it. I mean, first East Coast city, right? Nothing really has happened here on the East Coast.
Really great point. What's up with that?
Yeah.
Come on, catch up, people. I know it's a lot of work, but you can do it, I promise.
Yeah.
It's definitely a little scary to start coming out and like going to political meetings, but it is how politics is done.
And I don't know, like if you've ever, I'm guessing you probably haven't been, but kind of that DC type of burn. What's it called?
Oh, that looked really fun. I have not been.
They have it every year. It's usually in November. I think they actually changed it up this year, but obviously I think it was supposed to be
Rick went and there's like some really great photos that came out of that.
Can't remember what it's called. It's on the tip of my tongue.
First thing that happens is the White House is on fire.
Yeah, they've been having that for the past few years, at least. I'd say more than 5 years, maybe more. Blanking on the name of it.
No worries. But what were you going to say about it? The fact that it happens there is really influential.
No, just it happens there. Yeah, I think so.
I think so too. Like politicians get to see it. The one that comes to mind is Playa del Fuego for me, and that's out of Maryland, I think. There's another one. I don't know. Man, I wish Catharsis on the Mall. That's what it's called.
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah.
It was too close to us, and that's why we forgot. Catharsis on the Mall. So they do it at the National Mall, you know, where like the Lincoln Memorial and all that kind of stuff is. And it's pretty serious. I think I want to go. That sounds super fun. It sounds a lot cheaper than Burning Man too.
I was gonna try to go because they switched it to May, and you know my friends Deb and Lucas. Well, Deb was I think actually trying to do some breath work down there, and
cool.
we were gonna try to go down and offer that, but you know didn't hear back. But also I think it got canceled since it's obviously what's going on right now. But would have been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, maybe that's a hope. Like Burning Man just got canceled. That's a really big deal. My whole year has been very restructured. I'm sure many of your years have been restructured. So, you know, perhaps these regional burns, when it's okay to do them, can happen. And not to mention, like when there's hardship, creativity seems to spike. Mm-hmm. So like when Bush and Reagan were in office, like creativity, like the music got really good. And there's some really interesting spikes in musical creativity. And now what happens with COVID? Like Burning Man gets shut down. The creativity is still there. What are they going to do? Like, I think they're going to turn that creativity into some really interesting online things. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that a lot of funding goes into this microdose VR project that Android Jones appears to be involved with and more. Like, if anybody hasn't heard about that yet, check it out. Microdose VR. Fascinating. I kind of want to buy one right away as soon as it's available commercially.
Yeah, looks pretty awesome.
Yeah. So, you know, what happens when creativity is unleashed on new revolutionary platforms? And what kind of stuff can happen right now? Like, I'm not trying to push anybody to fight their trauma that's happening right now, their grief that's happening right now. But, you know, if you feel so inclined to like get creative, some really amazing stuff can happen right now. And during our last economic downturn, like some of the largest companies now were created. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Airbnb is just one.
Well, you make that comment, it makes me think like not hitting the pause button, but like, how do you take the trauma, the grief, the anger, whatever that's bubbling up and transmute it into creativity and really take whatever that is and do something with it, right? I think that's like where a lot of interesting projects and things come out of is, you know, either somebody struggling with something or something's coming up and then they get some creative burst and they put all their energy and passion into whatever it is because they had an experience in the past. I mean, I don't know. How did this project come to be, right? A lot of, for me, you know, a lot of experiences with holotropic states and breathwork and you too, and wanting to come together to share this with everybody because we believed it was a really important message to get out there and really taking that and doing something with it.
Mm-hmm. Alchemy. It keeps coming up.
Yeah.
I had the... perhaps manic idea the other day to start taking up alchemy kind of seriously and teaching alchemy workshops, but maybe not. Maybe I'll wait 10 years.
It's a good metaphor for working with stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, being able to like sit in the fire and letting things like work through a process and coming out on the other side. I think it's a really great metaphor for working with material, especially psychedelic material and whatever you're kind of going through. How do you use your experience and let it work through and sometimes that is just sitting in the fire, right? Going through something really intense and letting that something gets birthed out of it.
Dissolve and coagulate. So solvate coagula and as above, so below. And I just reminded me of my peak psychedelic or my peak breathwork psychedelic experience when I was just surrounded by fire for 5 hours, surrounded by fire. And everything was getting destroyed. Everything I believed was getting destroyed. And I didn't realize that was kind of an alchemical crucible type situation. Like that's where you burn the thing. And then you pick up the pieces and recreate it.
Out of the ashes rises the phoenix, right?
Yeah, let's hope. And so like when we're really down, so this isn't very psychedelic, but I was watching the movie Blow last night for the first time. I never watched that.
Good movie.
And Ray Liotta tells Johnny Depp in the beginning, like, when you're down, you never think you're going to get back up again. When you're high, you never feel high enough. So it's like, giving this young kid this advice of like, you're going to be riding this wave. When you're down, it's going to feel pretty shitty. You're never going to feel like you're going to get back up again, but we are going to get back up again. Mm-hmm. Shit's going to, I don't know what normal is anymore, but we're going to get something that feels better, soon. So, have hope. And, I don't know, like, as Kyle says, maybe you can figure out a way to transmute your suffering into creativity and something interesting for you. It doesn't need to be interesting to other people, guys. It's like, you can make something interesting for you. It's okay. In our classes, we have an integration project. And I remember one of our students like made a really cool thing out of just found materials outside.
Yeah.
And made sure that all the ugly bits got included. Like how beautiful is that for like a metaphor for integrating these crazy times? Like even the ugly bits need to be included in your work.
Right. And I think that brings up a good point about that project. Sometimes people ask like, well, what are you looking for? And it's really not about what we're looking for. It's what do you want to create? Right. I mean, that is the process that I want you to go through is through this integration phase. It's not for me. It's not to do a project to please me. It's a project that really means something to you. And how do you channel your energy into that? I think that's really important.
Cool, man. So we're at hour 13. So I think we should wrap. So thank you all for listening. It's been really fun. We hope you're enjoying these Friday Solidarity episodes and tell your friends about it. So if you want to support us, telling a friend is amazing. Just find an episode you love or think they might love and send it over. Secondarily, if you've got some spare change, which I know it's hard to come by these days, but we take donations at patreon.com/psychedelics today, as low as $2 a month. Helps us tremendously. So we would really appreciate any supporters over there. And we got merch at psychedelicstodayshop.com, cups and shirts. And we've got some books up there as well, ebooks, an integration workbook, and a trip journal. And there will be more classes coming soon. And Kyle, can you speak about the shadow course that's available?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, we have classes available right now. If you want to go check out our 8 common mistakes, spiritual emergence or psychosis,
it's free
webinars, and then, our navigating psychedelics lessons on self-care. We have the self-paced one that you can sign up for anytime. So if you're looking for, an overview of harm reduction, safety, preparation, navigating the psychedelic space, and, tons of material on integration, you can enroll in that anytime. But the shadow series, check that out. It's called Psychedelics in the Shadow. I think I subtitled it Exploring the Shadow Side of Psychedelia. A bunch of interviews I collected with Dr. Ido Cohen. And so it's a small little series. I think there's about 7 or 8 interviews, including a conversation with Ido and I. And we go all over the board. What is the shadow? How would Jung approach the shadow work and sexual abuse, kind of what could be happening in psychedelic spaces, retreat centers with abuse and sexual abuse, shadow side, exploring kind of what Joe and I were talking about in the beginning with businesses, ayahuasca tourism, all sorts of stuff. So check that out by donation at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. It seems like people have been loving it so far, been reading all the comments. So if you signed up, thanks for participating. And I hope you're enjoying the series, the interviews. I had a blast. I know Dr. Cohen did as well. And I think just really important for kind of what we're going through right now. We're definitely working through a lot of shadow material. Things are starting to emerge. How are we dealing with it? And this actually might be a really great resource if you're finding yourself battling up against some shadow stuff, right? Having kind of deep questions about psychedelic business space, or, the shadow stuff's emerging within me and my psychedelic experiences. How could I confront my shadow and how do I work with this? So check that out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com.
All right. So I think that's it for us. And thank you, Kyle. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
So this is Joe and Kyle signing off for Psychedelics Today. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody. Bye.